get Nick to do it. Nick Harper from Google. He can do that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations. Can you take out some of my work? Oh, no, I can do that. Yeah, that's fine. That's really funny. Congratulations. Thank you. Well done.
Brian became AD now.
AD, we'll have to figure out what area. What area? You want to make up a new one?
Sure. Childcare.
Oh, well, it could be its own.
Yeah.
That would be good. because
Childcare?
I need somebody about 4 a.m. to take care of mine.
Yeah.
And Sean.
Oh, good.
And the
Perfect.
duty that comes with it.
Yeah, good, you're perfect. Usually not at 4 a.m. You stay.
So let's start. Brian,
Do we have a note taker?
not yet. Where's Mike? Tony, did you see Mike? Can you take a few notes before?
Sure. That's nice.
Yeah.
All right, so we finished Monday. This is a little out of order. Did token binding. We were finishing with token exchange, but I think there were a couple sort of hanging pieces of that at the end. One was a request from Torsten in particular, but I think it's a more general thing that we need to further explain the relationship between resources, the resource parameter, the audience parameter, and the scope parameter. And I've talked with him a little bit offline. I think I know what to do there is basically just describe that when requesting a token, you are requesting the scopes at the resource and or audience. And if there's more than one resource or audience, you're basically asking for the full set of scopes at any of those at any of those targets. So I'll put some wording in there to clarify. And I'm considering maybe adding a specific error code for the authorization server to say it can't do that or it's unwilling to do that under certain conditions, because I think multiple resources, multiple audiences might be a difficult thing for some systems to fulfill. If you have thoughts about that, chat with me, but that's what I'm thinking right now. There was a hope to get it to working group last call, at least from me, but it sounds like people are interested in holding off a little bit for some implementation experience. I think that
was the suggestion that.
Was that the sentiment in the room?
Yeah, right. I don't remember who suggested that, but just to get an idea, talking about, can you?
Tony and William.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Can you take notes, Mike?
Wow. Okay.
Good. You obviously paid attention during the first meeting.
Yes.
That's good.
Tony said he had some developer feedback he was going to bring forth. Hopefully it'll be in English and actionable and meaningful.
Yeah. So do we? So so talking about the token exchange, on who is currently implementing token exchange or planning to do that? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. That's good. So like if we are able to collect the feedback from those 5 folks or 5 groups, that would already, I think, push us forward quite a bit.
Okay.
Cool. Maybe we should write down who those 5 people are. I saw Justin, I saw you, Brian, Mike, Dick, and Tony.
And William expressed an interest in having Google do it.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
So I think that's really all.
So when do you think we can see a new version of the document with this clarification that you mentioned at the beginning, resource scope, etc.?
Sometime before Chicago.
You think? but
To be honest, I'm going on a family vacation immediately after this, so I'm going to be out of pocket for a little bit.
But it's sometimes a refreshment if you sort of take the evening off and write a little bit.
You tell my wife that, and my kids. Probably in December sometime.
Okay, cool.
That's I think that's Torsten.
Okay,
honest.
thank you.
All right.
Okay, that's good. Torsten, it's your turn.
Hello, everybody. My name is Torsten Lollerstedt. I'm from Deutsche Telekom. And I would like to present you a new draft. As the title suggests, it's about security, OAuth security. Andre Labonnette and John Bradley and I wrote this draft. And can you show the first slide, please? And the reason is we had some discussions in Berlin about that would be a great idea to have a comprehensive list of all the topics that are right now floating around, are not really solved, implementation issues, new security threats, and so on. And we sat down and tried to start the work on this draft. And the motivation basically is because OAuth itself was published in 2012 and got massive traction since then. And what we have seen in the wild is that there are some practical issues with implementing it correctly. Typically basic stuff like XSRF or open redirectors and so on. And we thought it would be a good idea to give recommendations to developers how to do it right. That's the first motivation. Second motivation, my feeling is technology, or the underlying technology of OAuth changed a bit. For example, the way fragments are handled when redirects occur in user agents. And we should analyze that and find out what the consequences are, for example, on the implicit grant. Well, there are also changes that will support us in getting OAuth security tightened up, for example, the claimed URLs, which are supported by some of the major mobile operating systems. Tony will take some time to present the slides. You're already in the queue?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you turned this back to me. And last but not least, when we published OAuth originally, the typical setup looked very simple. There was a single client connecting to a single AS and interacting with a single resource server. And this has changed significantly. So for example, in third-party login or federated login scenarios, clients typically connect to more. Oh, thank you. That's cool. So I'm in full control again. So if we, for example, take a look into federated identity scenarios, there a client typically connects to more than one IDP, and they typically today implement OAuth or OpenID Connect. And this opens an attack angle for things like mix-up attack and so on, things we didn't really consider when writing the original security threat model. But more is going on or coming up. More dynamical scenarios are being used in conjunction with OAuth. And I think those reasons or those different motivations drove us to writing this RFC, because the current security considerations in RFC 6749 and 50 and the security threat model no longer suffice for that. So what's the intention of this draft? First of all, this is not intended to become a standard document, a standard tracks document. This is intended to be a working document, something we can use to capture everything we think is worth capturing about the open topics, the threats, the implementation issues, and also write down the potential mitigations. Because what I'm observing in the course of the last year, I would say, we have isolated discussions about one threat or another. We have discussions about this potential mitigation and another potential mitigation, but we don't come up with a systematic comparison between those mitigations. And what we also don't have is a big picture, which of those potential mitigations would solve which problems. Because what I'm dreaming of is that we say, okay, those are the changes to OAuth, those are the recommendations, and we close all the holes that we see today. And I would also like to capture the status of discussion. And if you take a look onto the draft, so by the way, has someone of you already read the draft? You are my hero. I mean, you are a co-author, so. Yeah, right. Okay, so I read it as well. So thank you very much. You're heroes. So if you take a look onto the draft, then you will see that we, for example, for the different mitigations that we already described, we discuss pros and cons for those different mitigations. So what I would like to come up with is a document that facilitates the discussion process within the working group. And we do not plan to document all the threats and all the countermeasures in this document, but to have a kind of an umbrella document and to refer to other drafts that other people already have written down. For example, John has a draft on Open Redirector, Mike has a draft on Mixup and so on. So we can use the document as kind of an umbrella when other drafts exist to give the context, and we can put content in the draft when no other draft exists. So the long-term goal from my perspective and the perspective of my co-authors is we come up with ideas what OAuth extensions we really need to define, for example, for code injection prevention. And we write down a comprehensive list of items, actions, or things a developer needs to implement in order to implement OAuth in a secure fashion. The bullets I gave are just examples, so this is not the real list, but just to give you an impression. So that could be a BCP, and either return this document in the BCP or write a new BCP. I don't care about that, right? So, but that's the long-term goal. So that we come up with a real comprehensive description. If you want to do it right, do it that way. Oh, that's a bit small. So this gives you an impression on what the document covers so far. So the elements in red are the sections that we already filled, and green are the potential countermeasures that we are describing. So the document is structured as follows. We first have a section describing the different means to steal credentials or to leak credentials in OAuth. Credentials meaning access tokens, authorization codes, refresh tokens. And we've got a section describing the different threats regarding injections, so code injection, access token injection, all this stuff, XSRF. And we also have a section about open redirectors. And all the sections that have a TBD in the title are, as the name suggests, to be determined. So we focused, in the first version, we focused on the redirect URL validation, leakage via HTTP referrer headers and fragments, and code injection. Oops. Okay, so from my perspective, if the working group decides to adopt this document and to use it the way we are proposing, the next step will be to complete the description of all the different threats and the mitigations, and to really have a discussion in the working group about the mitigations, their assessment from client-side perspective, server perspective, cost perspective, complexity perspective, all those different aspects that needs to be taken into account when meeting the decision to what are we gonna recommend, and then we should document that and start work on a BCP. So that's basically the idea. And from a tactical perspective, I would like to get your feedback on do you think that makes sense what we proposing, and what are the next topics you would like us to cover, and us meaning the working group. So that's basically it. Questions?
Yeah, Tony Nedlin. So we've had a lot of discussion at Microsoft lately about this particular topic. And you said that, and I'm just not quite sure what your intent is here, right? There's over 12 documents that are in the list today that have been standardized. Our developers can't piece the 12 together and understand what to do and what not to do. I think understand, and so I don't know what you'd run, what you're trying to mitigate. Are you trying to combine them all together and find out the mitigations between the issues and mitigations between all the specs when they're used together? Or are you just talking about OAuth? So I'm a little confused on, you know, what your total goal is. And I'm also, you know, carrying on the message from Microsoft that this is, it's somewhat getting out of hand for our developers, all the specs that are here. And so what happens is they wind up creating their own, they look at it and say, I can't understand it, and they wind up creating their own stuff. And that just drives us, you know, nuts at Microsoft.
Good that they have people like you to explain it to them.
Yeah, but that's, you know,
No,
you
just
can't,
kidding,
yeah,
just
but
kidding.
you can't do that all the time, right? They just, you know, somebody says, you know, they've got a problem to solve and they go off and do it. And you have no clue what they've done until after it's shipped and and somebody has a problem.
But it sounds
Shall I answer the question?
yeah.
Because it was directed to me.
No, let Rich will answer.
maybe
Rich, what do you
first,
say?
and then I add
Just
to that.
asking.
Yeah, okay. So
you ask for the.
but I agree with what you're trying to do here, but I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's broad enough.
Surprisingly, I would agree with you. I think it's not enough. What we're trying to focus on first are the obvious problems. And the obvious problems are the threats we have been discussing for a year or now and didn't come to a conclusion.
Yeah, but I understand that, but that doesn't, you know, those are probably existing threats, right? We understand that, but that's, we don't have the landscape of everything to understand what there's no architecture to this.
Yeah, that's right.
This mess
So
here.
first of all, one of the reasons why we need this document is, from my perspective, because we didn't really evolve and enhance the security threat model, the overall security threat model, while we were adopting other specifications, namely dynamic registration, for example, which changed the capabilities of OAuth a lot. So we didn't do that. Now we somehow try to fill those or fill this hole. And I also feel that documents like the BCP or native apps address a real need. So I think beside the specs, there's a need for recommending best practices, not only for security, also from a design and architectural standpoint.
Right, but I mean, we're running without much guidance here. Maybe this
That's right.
Maybe
That's right.
this will help do a little bit more guidance, but you know, these add-ons aren't making a lot of sense. I mean, Pixie was just a patch. I don't think it was, you know, well thought out and something that, you know, we could have avoided earlier. And so we have these little patches that are been placed around here. So
I think that's a question for the working group in general. My personal opinion on that, speaking as Thorsten, I think we lack an architectural overview and vision, and that's why we have this patchy landscape.
Yep.
That's it. And I would say we need more BCP documents for different kinds of applications. The other day I talked to one of our architects, and we were talking about how to implement multi-tenancy resource servers, or resource servers that have relationships with different authorization servers. This is, from my perspective, a very interesting topic that could be solved in different ways. I think this is another example where we really need a BCP. Or your question, Dick, over dinner on Monday. Who actually does refresh talk rotation and why? Because it's not documented in the RC.
I support this work, so I'm just saying it's not enough.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony.
Ben Kaduk, I also support this work. I'm really happy you're doing it. I'm going to say Kathleen's name to get her attention. But if this is supposed to be just a living document, this particular thing, I feel like you should just go ahead and do it and not even bother asking for working group adoption. Because if it's not going to be published, I mean, you only care about working group adoption by the time you want to make a BCP. I think you should just do the work.
No, not necessarily.
Oh, don't.
So you can still have a document, sort of the fact that it's a working group document and serves as as Thorsten said, a point for discussion, which then points to the documents that mitigate specific solutions, and further BCP documents. It could still have a lot of value and gives people an indication like what are we working on, rather than having an independent individual submission that is one of many.
Okay.
So just to say that clearly, I'm not interested in having a draft that just expresses my, John, and Andrea's opinion. I want to gather the opinion of all the working group members and to come up with a conclusion. What's the right mitigation? Otherwise, we won't come to a conclusion. Because what I have been observing is we didn't come to any conclusion for any of the open security issues in 1 year.
Okay.
Dick Hart. So there's two questions I have. One of them is, why aren't we starting on the security BCP right away as opposed to just having this draft? Like, why don't we just say that this is the start of the BCP, or is that what you're saying?
Because I don't think we have this best current practice right now.
Okay.
That's my personal opinion.
That's future practice.
Because otherwise it would be named best wrong current practice or bad current practice.
And my other question is, what about sort of broadening the scope of this instead of it just being security, that it is just the OAuth best current practice, which I think is tying into Tony's comment of like, here's a document to read to know, here's the best practice on how to do OAuth, and included in that is the security pieces.
This is getting huge. If other people support that work, yeah, why not? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, the problem always is you need contributors, you know, people that write text, people that review the stuff, and so on.
So, John Bradley, I support having best current practices. I think it's if we decide to start this work, I think that's a document management issue that in some cases it may make sense to have modular things like native apps, single page applications that developers who are interested in how do I use OAuth to do a specific thing may find more approachable, but we have to do the work anyways. We can later decide how we divide it up, whether it's one large monolithic document. You know, everybody's going to, no matter what we do, half the people will decide it was the wrong document structure, and it will be will be Hannes's fault. So I think that we should adopt it. It should be a working group document, because in some cases, some large organizations and governments, etc., if it doesn't have an RFC number, it doesn't really exist. So, you know, yes, we can have a living document that keeps us all happy, but unless we snapshot it from time to time when I'm talking to some government and they say, well, what's the standard? Is it an ISO standard? No, it's an IETF standard. Oh, well, I guess. But if it's an individual submission, they just don't take it as seriously.
I have one question on what Tony was proposing and what UDIC also piled on is sort of this architecture. And I'm not quite sure how that looks like. So for example, the best current practice for the native apps, in some sense, this is an architecture because it talks about a specific aspect, a specific deployment variant, then it makes ties a couple of specifications together. Sort of the big architecture is something that is, or the single architecture is very difficult to create in OAuth because all along it was used in very different contexts. So I'm curious on how that would look like, and maybe you guys can enlighten me.
John, again, I think maybe we could have a stab at an overall architecture, but from a developer point of view, I think that the architecture to do some particular task is more approachable. That somebody who's doing a native app doesn't necessarily need to know about token exchange and various other things. Yeah. So if we can focus the BCPs to be more task oriented, I think that's going to be more helpful. And I also think that along with BCP, like we did with native apps, we also, at least in the OpenID Foundation, we created actual open source libraries that developers could look at the code and figure out how to do it as examples. It's not just, this is the high level architecture, because developers, again, relate more to actual code examples or things that they can incorporate into their
But
project.
isn't that already what we do today? We just on Monday we talked about the completion of the native apps work, and you are on the agenda on the last item to talk about future work, and there you will entertain the idea of another best current practice. And in the native apps document, for those who have read it, it points to, for example, Pixie, and it discusses other aspects. And so I'm wondering whether we are, like what we do, whether we are so far off what you guys are actually talking about. We just need to sort of continue along that line, at least from I'm talking purely about the architecture stuff.
Right, but that still leaves single page applications. What's the best practice for? I have a web server.
We started with
I have
one.
this.
Yeah, we started with one, and then it was well received. So
Right.
we add another one, and I think that's to me it sounds like from a type of approach to the work seems to be more manageable rather than sort of trying to work out the architecture.
No,
I agree with you agreeing with me.
Right. And Dick, do you agree to that approach as well?
Yeah, I think it works well if you have, here's the type of thing I'm trying to do, and have the developer. I mean, I've used the native apps BCP internally probably a dozen times of telling people, here, go read this, and then ask me questions.
And the good thing about that is that we actually, William and I have gotten a lot of feedback from the development community. It hasn't been just us telling them, this is the way to do it. Well, mostly it's that, but they do actually give us feedback on, well, have you thought of this in this particular environment? Did you know that Windows acts in this particularly bizarre way, etc. So having that feedback from the developers, because there is an open source project, is helpful.
Yeah.
So Torsten, from my perspective, after listening to the discussion, I think in the end, it would make sense to have BCPs for different kinds of things, as Dick called it. So for different kinds of clients, but also for different scenarios and different kinds of resource and authorization servers. The question is how to approach that, and which BCPs to write down. And I think if we write BCPs for those different client types, then we should also incorporate the security stuff. But I also think that the security threat model and the analysis and the mitigations are cross-cutting concerns.
Sure.
So I think it makes a lot of sense to work this way, and then we need to decide which BCPs to write in afterwards. That would be my proposal.
So I'd agree with that. I think it's good to have the security all in one BCP, and then you could have the other BCPs that are, say, talking about single page flow, say, to refer to the security BCP for people to see. Is that what you're saying?
More or less,
More or
yeah.
less, okay.
I'm rather reluctant to call it a BCP, but I can live
For
with that.
security?
Yeah, it's just an informational draft right now. So,
A discussion document.
Huh?
What sort of a discussion document? It doesn't matter what the name is.
this is process. I don't care. I don't care about process, but content-wise, I agree with you. What would be very important for us, or very substantial or valuable feedback, if people could tell us which types of client and which scenarios they care the most. So would you like us to take a look especially into JavaScript apps or single-page apps or whatever? Because in the end, redirect URI validation, for example, works completely different for those different client types. And we need to anyhow distinguish those in the draft. So what I would like to suggest is to post a message to the list or so, and people can propose which scenarios, which kind of applications, clients, and backend system they want us to consider. And that would be also an indication where we need BCPs for.
let's have William say something.
Hi. Yeah, I actually think this should be a BCP, and that it probably should obsolete RFC 6819 if possible. And what I like about the BCP model is that it does allow that kind of snapshotting that people have been talking about, which I think is a valuable thing. And people, allows people to give that stable identifier for all the security issues. So I'm definitely supportive of a security BCP.
Okay, seems everybody wants a BCP. I'm fine. I'm convinced.
Okay. Well, yeah. Let's. So, I will ask who is in favor or against adoption of the document that Thorsten was just talking about and introducing to us. So please raise your hand if you're in favor of adopting that document as a working group item. I see about 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah, 13 hands. Who's against adopting this document as a working group item? No, he raised his hand.
No, he's an ally.
Don't wake him up.
And William, come on.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that was clear. So there was strong, like 15 people in favor, nobody against, and so.
I didn't let him finish counting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Good.
Thanks.
Good.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Don't go there.
Let's make OAuth great again. Yeah.
You'd be remiss not to. All right, we good?
Where's
Cool.
the?
I don't know.
Do you have the clicker?
Oh, I've got the clicker. Does it work? Yeah, it works. Awesome. Okay. So I want to talk about what is currently listed as the OAuth HTTP signing draft. The whole motivation behind the entire POP architecture was to have something that was roughly in parity with bearer tokens. So you need a way to get a token, need a way to use a token, need various ways to validate the token as it's being presented at the protected resource. And so getting a token is really pretty much the same, except that you get a key associated with that. We've got a different document that's working on how to do that, whether or not the client presents the key or has the key issued by the AS. We're not talking about that here right now. Validating a token, we toss our hands up in the air and say, it's up to you, go figure it out. But obviously we've got introspection, JOT, and a bunch of other things that will need to be adapted for use in the POP world. What's interesting in this conversation is the middle one is how do you use one of these POP tokens? So you go through all this work to associate a key with a token, and how do you get it over to the protected resource? So what we have right now is a presentation spec that includes signing, presentation of the token itself, and a method for protecting the HTTP request in various ways. And bit of a historical note here, all of these three are kind of wrapped up together inside of a single specification, because originally I wrote a draft spec that actually only did the last bit, hoping and assuming that somebody else would write the bits for how to do the signing and how to do the presentation, and nobody did. So eventually I added those in and said, like, okay, this is how you kind of do the whole thing. And the signing bits for the HTTP request message are really optional additions on top of that. However, that seems to really confuse a lot of people. So I'm going to break down today exactly how these things all fit together. First off, we've got signing, and it's basically you take a JSON object, you put your access token inside of it, currently it's in there as a timestamp, it could be a nonce, I really don't care. Just some way to have a non-repeatable transactional kind of thing of some type in there, whatever. Wrap that in a JSON web signature and sign it with the key associated with the token. Really not hard. Since we're using Jose, there's a crypto agility already in there. If you want to do elliptical curves or shared secrets, or the Jose quantum cryptography draft that somebody's going to write someday, I don't care. it's Jose. It's a JWS. It's not a JWT, incidentally, because this is not really an assertion. It's not carrying sort of application level information that a JOT normally would, but we are using the JWS general purpose structure for carrying this stuff over. Presenting the token is really in parallel with 6750. So chuck it in a header, chuck it in a form body, chuck it in a query parameter. We did all three with pretty much the same caveats and limitations that 6750 has, because that honestly hasn't really changed all that much in the last 4 years, except for the fact that the middle one is, I would honestly be willing to drop the form parameter, because back when we wrote OAuth 2, form encoded in, JSON out was sort of the rule of the day for writing an API. These days, that's just not true. It's JSON in, both JSON out. So I'd be happy to drop that one. I don't think we really lose anything for having it in or out of there. The other two I do think are important because they have very specific use cases. And yes, I do even mean the query parameter, but that's not what I'm here to argue today. What I'm here to argue today is the third bit is, and that's actually the HTTP message signing. This is something that OAuth 1 did that OAuth 2 doesn't. Now, there's very good reasons that OAuth 2 doesn't. Part of that is that a lot of developers got this wrong in OAuth 1. And we know this. We know this because many of us in this room and many of us that were involved in the development of OAuth 2 were OAuth 1 developers, and we're tired of screwing things up and having other developers trying to interoperate with us screwing this part of the process up. However, it still is valuable in a lot of cases to protect the HTTP request that you are making with a signature of some type. And so the idea here is that the signature that you are generating is going to be associated with the same token key that you're using to make the presentation proof. That JWS that we had before, well, what we're going to do is we're going to use that to create a detached signature of the HTTP message. Now, unlike existing HTTP signature methods that are out there, so AWS has their own proprietary one. There have been a few others that are floating around. This one does not assume that the HTTP message remains unscathed throughout the process. Instead, it very much admits that lots of things can go wrong in the middle of it. What that means is that this is not just take the HTTP request exactly as is and create a signature, then take it exactly as is and re-sign it on the other side. No, instead, this is designed for a world where things get manipulated in the middle, headers get injected, query parameters get mucked around, all kinds of stuff like that, the stuff that actually happens in the real world. And so you only sign the stuff that you know as part of your API, as part of your deployment, as part of your documentation. You only sign the stuff that you know is worth signing, that's not going to get screwed up on the way through. And it's up to the application on the far side to make sure that the stuff that comes in and is signed is the stuff that it cares about and the stuff that makes sense for it to be able to do its job. Yes, this is a compromise position, and I think that this is actually a reasonable compromise given the complexity of the HTTP protocol and the complexity of HTTP deployments and all of the different ways that they can get screwed up on the way through any given process. Anybody that's done a reverse proxy or any type of HTTP application framework will know the pain that this can cause if you have something that assumes static, pristine preservation of the HTTP messages on either end, i.e. anybody that's tried to write an OAuth 1 client in any of those situations. Now, anyway, this is not fully comprehensive. There are some corner cases that it doesn't cover, and we've enumerated those and just said that if you have if you have stuff that fits in these cases, don't sign that bit. You can't sign it. So instead of making this try to bend over backwards to fit every last weird corner case of HTTP, of which there are a lot, we just said this doesn't do that part. It doesn't go that far, and that's okay. So you sign what makes sense. That's really kind of the gist of this whole thing. The key point here is that this is all optional. This is all optional in today's draft spec. You add these components into the base signature. The base signature is over the access token, which is being presented as is, uninterpreted by the client, still opaque to the client, just like a bearer token, and that nonce timestamp transactional identifier, whatever we end up wanting to call it. This is all in addition to that. All right. And you only add this stuff in if it makes sense for you to do so in your API and if your application needs it. So what I propose, since this still seems to confuse people, is that we just split this into two documents. We put the HTTP signing in a separate document, how it was in the first place, and we put the core signing bits in their own document, and we move the two forward together. And if somebody wants to raise a stink and say that the HTTP signing is experimental, I'm actually okay with that, because it kind of is. Because signing HTTP is really, really hard, as it turns out. And we have not yet had a single comprehensive solution that I have seen. Now, remember, this is, in fact, a detached signature. This is not taking the entire HTTP message and sort of, encapsulating it inside the JWS, nor is it assuming that the HTTP message keeps some pristine format outside of the JWS. So it's not the, Mike, can you remind me what the external JWS is called? Okay, you wrote it. You wrote it. Whatever Mike's last draft in Jose was, it's not that either. Thanks. Anyway, so my suggestion is that we move both of these forward. If we want to mark the HTTP signing, and have them cross-reference each other. So have the core spec say, and hey, if you want to add protection for the HTTP message components, here's a way to do that. And have the HTTP signing thing say, well, okay, we're going to tell you how to hash the message, how to do all the verification. You're going to have to put it somewhere. You might want to put it into an OAuth pop signed request. All right, so we put the signing and presentation in one document, HTTP message hatching and detached signatures inside another document, move both of them forward, publish it, call it a day. The end. So I think that there has been some chatter about alternate presentation mechanisms, because it seems that some people forget that if we're going to be doing all of this work with OAuth POP, we need to be able to send the token from the client to the resource server in some fashion. But I haven't seen any concrete proposals. That said, even if there were additional concrete proposals, that's fine. We have 6750 and whatever the kitten one is. The kitten OAuth thing, do you remember? Yeah, the SASL GSS API thing, whatever number that one is. We've got both of those, and they don't fight because they're doing different kinds of things. You can get the token in the same way and use it in different ways depending on what kind of API you're talking to, and everybody gets along just fine. Same kind of thing's happening here. So that was always the intent. That's why token presentation was pulled out as a separate document in the early-ish days of OAuth 2 to allow that kind of protocol flexibility. We're inheriting that and embracing that here. So if you've got a different way to present a POP token, go for it. I haven't seen any yet, but if somebody comes up with one, that doesn't mean that this one's not useful. Also, side note, I've actually implemented this, both server and client side. A couple of people, and a couple of other people have done their versions of it as well. So this is a thing that does exist. It's not a thing that has a universal applicability, but we know that. So bearer tokens get the job done in a lot of cases, and that's fine. This is for cases where you want to kind of pay the extra cost and get the extra benefits. Exactly. All right, okay. That's all I got.
Mike's line is open, I guess.
Ben Kaduk. So I was reading really fast when I read the draft. Do you talk any about doing discovery for, like, when you learn about the API, you also learn about which parameters should be included in the signature?
So yeah, we don't actually address discovery because discovery is kind of a black magic voodoo box in the OAuth world. And it is. And so how the client knows even which server to talk to, OAuth doesn't care, and we inherited that attitude. So we do say that, I forget the exact word, but we do say something like the API must document or something like that which things it expects to be signed. Right. But we don't say what that means.
Yeah, we have this, if you remember the discussion on Monday, we had this discussion about metadata, and there was metadata, for example, also about the resource, so where this could potentially belong to. But I don't think it's there because the work is still at a little unstable.
Yeah, there's definitely no structured or automated thing. I think we have some language that says you got to write it down, but if we don't, we probably should.
Yeah, I mean, probably also some security considerations about that, because if you're not sure about what you sign.
No, we definitely do have security considerations about that. Thanks to Phil, we've also got some security considerations about things like argument order, and a couple of other things that aren't necessarily strictly preserved by the hashing process. So it basically, like, if these things really matter to you, this isn't going to give you that information. You've got to have some other way to make sure that that works. So yeah, we definitely do say that, because that was actually the root of a really big problem in OpenID 2, a real world exploit with OpenID 2, where providers were taking in messages, validating the signature, and then just assuming that everything that came in was signed, which isn't the case. And this is really kind of, it's taking the same approach. It's, you list what you signed and you sign that, and this is kind of doing the same thing. So this was not fully invented out of whole cloth. It's based on that same pattern, but it has the exact same drawback. So yeah, as an RS, if you care about a parameter being signed, and it's left out of the signature, but it's present in the request, that's got to be a problem. But it's up to the RS to figure that out.
Any further feedback? Or so at the Berlin IETF meeting, where Justin unfortunately wasn't present, we had, and at that time we also adopted the token binding work. So there was a little bit of bad attitude towards this work, and it sort of the perception was that since we're working on token binding, we don't need this anymore. But I don't hear the same type of feeling now anymore. So I guess leaving the question about document management aside, I think I would like to get a sense of the room, what they think about moving this work forward. And so basically, please raise your hand if you think we should try to finish this work in the ACE working group, this meaning HTTP signing. Raise your hand now.
In ACE?
In sorry, in
Okay.
OAS. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but don't
Wait,
vote on what you think.
Sorry about that. That was confusing. So let me try it once more. It's late for me. Raise your hand if you think we should continue this work in this working group. See, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hands. And please raise your hand if you think that we should stop this work.
You only
Tony.
count once, Tony.
Once for Microsoft, once for Azure.
Yeah. And Phil. So we have 2 persons against this. Put it to the list. I put it to the list already.
So as the document editor, apart from doing the split, the document's been done for ages. There's not really been additional feedback. There's a handful of implementations. It's just the working group has not said kick it out the door and go, from my perspective. So,
Dick Hart, has there been anyone that's deployed or tried to deploy?
not at like the Amazon scale, if that's what you mean, but in small pockets, yeah.
My concern is the worry that if we have this and we haven't really thought it all the way through and it isn't all the way baked, it's yet another spec for people trying to figure out what to do with OAuth to do, and potentially leads to more sort of incompatibility of people trying to make things work together.
Torsten's going to fix that with the BCP. We're fine.
Hi, Rich Sauls is a stranger. Why would splitting, if it's been stuck for a year, why would splitting it unstick it?
Because some of the, a lot of the comments about not moving it forward are about the HTTP message hashing and signing portion, and not about the token presentation.
That's like the caboose that you'll cut off and let the rest of it go forward.
Right, exactly. And, you know, this isn't the first time this working group has done that in order to unstick things.
Okay.
So.
Thanks.
I was going to say more or less the HTTP signing has been the sticking point for a lot of people, I think. So maybe there's more hope for it with just the presentation. sort of a sidebar question. Is there any mechanism in the presentation though that keeps a token from being presented by the resource server to another resource server?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Asymmetric keying.
But the mechanism itself, the fact that the token is bound to a key.
No, but yes, but you're signing the token and a timestamp.
Yeah. You can't present that token without the signature to another RS then.
And when you present it,
Right.
you get those things and the signature.
Right.
So the RS can just turn around and
and represent the whole thing.
represent it.
Yeah, you need to tie it at least to some of the other parameters.
Well, that's why the HTTP message signing was added in there.
Right.
But I think that the presentation is the key aspect of it, and the presentation needs to cover or at least consider the security implications.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, I would prefer to see the presentation sort of fully baked and the HTTP signing separated, and even it could be experimental or just dropped. But the presentation needs.
Okay. My question then is, how would you do that without covering portions of the incoming HTTP request?
Well, yeah, so,
that's one of the fields.
So
that's literally
so
the solution that we already have.
So
This is what I find frustrating about this conversation.
Yes. Right. So this is John Bradley. So the token presentment without actually having an audience or destination as part of that doesn't actually move the ball very much further ahead. So if we're going to split the document, we should consider some basic things so that we actually meet a worthwhile security goal by having the presentment method.
You mean something like the resource indication?
Well,
yeah. I mean, are you going to do a URL? You're going to do resource identifier? What are you going to do?
It could just be the host. I'm not making a proposal as to what needs to be there, but something so that one host can't replay it against another host, so that
unless you have two APIs on the same host, and that doesn't actually help you. I mean, that's security theater at best.
Something to identify
So,
the resource.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So something to identify the resource server. Otherwise, we may not actually be moving the ball far enough ahead to make it worthwhile for people to deploy.
That's true.
Right. Except that you can do audience restriction without the presentment mechanism inside the token itself.
Right. That's true.
So, I mean, this
goes back to the discussion we had on Monday.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So
the question then is it that the token can't be used at multiple servers, or this specific request? And if it's this specific request, then we're getting into talking about signing the request.
Well, this specific request is covered if the token itself is appropriately audience restriction. So maybe
not necessarily. But go ahead.
So maybe it's having enough security considerations to understand that this alone, without properly audience restricting the actual token, you need to use the HTTP signing to sign parts of that.
Yeah.
So we just need to make sure that it actually is meaningful and actionable, and people don't wind up thinking that they get security that they don't.
That's an absolutely fair observation.
Mike Jones, I was busy taking notes and didn't repeat my position at the time that I'm already on record for, that I don't think we need to do this. It's not that it's terrible work per se, but we're already doing so many things that I think it's been starved for attention because we're doing other things that people consider higher priority. And I haven't seen any groundswell of people saying we're going to implement this. So it's not clear to me that it's a good use of our time.
I've talked to a number of people who are waiting for a published spec before they touch something like this. And those are the circles that I tend to run in, though.
I guess we need to, as Kathleen said, put it to the list. It was, again, a difficult discussion like we had on the mailing list. I hope we can make some progress on this topic. Thank you, Justin.
Well, I think Kathleen has
Oh, sorry.
something to add.
Kathleen Moriarty. So this discussion really makes it sound like it's still pretty stuck. So I put it to the list, but I don't know if there's the drive at the moment. I mean, what do the chairs think?
Yeah, it sounds again it's a little bit stuck. Yeah.
Yeah, just make sure on the list, and then
Yeah. The
we
sad
try
thing
again.
is, for this stuff, we actually have more implementations than for some of the other proof possession mechanism that we have been looking at.
Okay.
The token binding, for example.
Token bindings. Yeah,
Right.
and token binding is not a proof of possession mechanism.
It is a
That's-
proof of possession mechanism,
it's-
just done
mm,
differently.
Yeah, but it's not bound to the token itself necessarily.
Of course.
It can
Of
be.
course it is.
No, it's not.
It
Of
is.
course, it is.
There's
no.
a token. There's a key in the token.
Yes, but it doesn't need to be unique. It doesn't need to be uniquely bound to the token.
This neither. So
It
you
is
can,
if the AS is generating it, but anyway.
But anyway, doesn't matter. We put that. We need to discuss this on the list. So we have 5 minutes left. And maybe John, you could come over here and talk a little bit about potential future work.
Portion of the program.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to dance. There have been requests. John Bradley, Ping. So we wanted to talk a bit about some of the new work. So on the resource indicator, which we've gone around about several times, Brian reposted our original draft. I will point out that this is essentially the same mechanism that Azure AD uses, and when Tony gets up, I'll point that out again when he objects to it. It's a matter of principle. So there is implementation experience. He's objecting. You're confused. It's normal. So we should consider actually adopting that as a working group document. I don't know. Have you? It's sort of stuck as an individual submission. I don't. So the chairs can consider whether or not to adopt that. There are other BCPs that we just talked around. William and I have had a bunch of inquiries from Microsoft and other places around single page applications and what the best practices are for that. I'm seeing like lots of Fortune 100 companies that have now all decided that single page applications are cool, but have no idea how they're doing OAuth with single page applications, and that is leading to some interesting interpretations. You can tell that he's make that face every time he thinks of it.
And it's a little in line with what we had discussed earlier in the meeting when Tony and Dick went to the microphone. I think it's a coincidence, but I think there's more interest now after we did the native apps.
So we should probably do some polling as to which, we only have so many resources. We should decide which topics we want to work on once we have the JWT assertion profile. We're finishing off token exchange, etc. There's a bunch of questions around. It's probably a BCP topic for business to business. What happens when your RS gets a token and you actually want to do something with it to talk to another RS? So I think we have a bunch of sort of server to server documents, sort of user not present. So there's probably another BCP that what happens when you have this sort of circumstance, so that people can actually see how those various documents work together. There's also
Let the others ask some questions.
no. He's just blocking the microphone for me.
Okay.
I didn't even pay him. He's going to extract something from me later. I know.
I'm just enjoying the view. Torsten,
Thank you.
One question, John. If you say single page application, what does it mean? Is it a JavaScript application?
Yeah, the people, the trendy, I didn't even know when I first heard it. People were talking about single page application. I had no idea, but that's
no post request, no get request.
Yeah, so out on the intertubes, people refer to the pattern of having JavaScript executing in the browser, making web calls and API calls using fetch or in various other mechanisms as single page applications.
Okay, Torsten again. I would support what you said, Hannes. I think if we make an inquiry, let people give feedback on where they see a real need for BCPs, because we have not that plenty of capacity, and I think we should focus on the most relevant BCPs. The most relevant BCPs.
Tony Nadlin, just for the record, we don't necessarily use a single page. We have a few applications that use it. That's not our main driving force in Azure.
The Azure people have been making inquiries.
There are certain, as I said, there are certain Azure
customers.
people. That doesn't mean Azure, okay?
Okay.
So there are smart people in Azure.
So we ran out of time.
There are people who want to make single page applications, and God help them, some of them use Azure. But
on that pleasant note,
yeah, we ran out of time. Okay. But what I'm going to do is I will post a message to the list to sort of ask for the type of need for PCPs that people have, and then we have to figure out on which one of those actually we can work on first, and
Right.
which ones we have to do later.
We also have some sort of lingering work around post message for authentication, which probably, depending upon whether or not we actually or post message using post message to replace fragment encoding, which whether or not we go forward with that somehow would impact on what the best practice for single page applications actually is.
Torsten?
Post message just rang a bell in my head, so I'm Torsten. I think, yeah, you distracted me, man. I think our document can potentially provide as the justification why it makes sense to have a post message mechanism instead of redirects with fragments.
Right.
So I think could be one way to pursue or to approach that topic.
Yeah,
just
post message is more complicated. There are lots of hidden gotchas, so that probably also requires an open source project and sample JavaScript to keep people from shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, what I would like what I mean is, first we discuss the need with all the pros and cons, and then if we decide to move that forward, then let's have a draft on post message. That's what I'm proposing.
We already have a draft on post message in the working group. It's just that people aren't working on it.
And we are running circles.
Yeah, didn't we? I thought you adopted that.
No, we never.
Okay.
We had one document also in the OpenID Foundation, and we never got anywhere. But we ran over time already. We need to push that. Is that true? Are we finished?
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
4 minutes. No time for the song. Sorry.
Gotta quick get some drinks before the plenary. If you have the blue sheets,
Yeah,
bring them
please,
out.
the blue sheet.
Sign them if you haven't.
Thorsten, sollen wir heute Dinner gehen oder? Können wir Dinner gehen oder habt ihr Verlust? Dinner. Oder ich weiß nicht, was die anderen wollen. Müssen wir mal gucken, was die sein. Ja.
Was ist jetzt, sagen wir mal, Vorgehensweise?
Soll ich jetzt hier was machen? Soll ich gleich die DCP machen? Soll ich hier noch anders nennen? Ich muss das erstes einmal die Meeting Minutes schicken. Ab der nächsten Folge darf schon mal das weiter nur das müsste das auf den Namen. Okay. Ich kann auch die Security Topics lassen. Ja. Lass mir